Hi, Ozzy here. There have been a lot of videos going back and forth of late between presuppositionalists and their critics about something called the primacy of existence. That's the idea that the very concept of something actually existing is an undeniable truth which is itself assumed whenever we make any other knowledge claims. It's often expressed tautologically as existence exists. Most recently, a YouTuber by the name of Capricious Black Box made a video about all of this. It's a good video, worth watching, and I'll provide a link in the description box to it. In that video, he argues for the undeniability of the primacy of existence, while acknowledging it may not be a sufficient foundation upon which we can secure the rest of our knowledge claims when arguing with presuppositionalists. But, he further argues, it does serve as a legitimate and satisfactory rejoinder to the presuppositionalist question, can you be certain of anything? More precisely, he argues it's satisfactory when talking to the disciples of Psi Ten Bruggencate, or the so-called Psi clones. And I want to challenge that. That's what this video is about. The problem with the primacy of existence as a counter-apologetical response to the presuppositionalist challenge is not merely that it doesn't suffice as a foundation for knowledge. It's true that it's no foundation for the rest of our knowledge claims. Nothing convincingly follows from the premise existence exists. It's just too vague and too general. That's not the problem. The problem is that it begs the very question at issue, which is being raised by the presuppositionalist and presented as a challenge to us. Specifically, the presuppositionalist argument is that one needs some general epistemological account of how one can know anything. Not some specific proposition, but how anything at all can be known, as opposed to being merely believed to be true. More specifically, the presuppositionalist is challenging his opponent to explain how he or she can rely upon his or her cognitive faculties, everything from the reliance upon memory and your perceptual abilities to your trust in induction and deduction. So the general question being put to you is there anything you can genuinely know? And how is such knowledge even a possibility given the conceptual resources within your non-Christian worldview? Now, regrettably, those presuppositionalists who are disciples of Psi Ten Bruggencate ask this in a confused form when they ask, can you be certain of anything? This is confused and ill-posed because absolutely nothing in the presuppositionalist's actual challenge rests on the question of certainty. But they think that insisting on certainty makes it a harder question to answer, so that's why they pose it the way they do. But making certainty a condition for knowledge doesn't actually make the problem any harder. It's irrelevant to what they're really asking, and we should not shirk the principle of intellectual charity here by focusing on one little question when their intention and challenge to us is clear. One should always construe one's opponent's arguments in its best form, and there's much else that they say when they make these arguments, which makes it clear what they are trying to ask. Now, given that the question is how knowledge is even possible, what they want is an account of how and why you trust in your cognitive capacities when you reason, including the very use of such things as induction and deduction and specific forms of deductive argumentation such as reductio ad absurdum argumentation. So it's nothing to your purposes as a counter-apologist to trot out a deductive argument or a reductio ad absurdum argument, specifically for the primacy of existence, for instance, because the challenge being put to you is precisely to come up with a means by which you can defend the use of deductive argumentation itself. That's the challenge. This is why they're constantly asking if it would be circular reasoning to defend the use of reasoning using reasoning. This is why they ask, how do you know that you're not dreaming? Or how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? Or that you're not insane and having hallucination? Or that your reasoning is impaired by drugs? Or that you're not suffering from some other cognitive malfunction? How exactly can you, or anyone, on your worldview, be confident that the process by which you arrive at your conclusions reliably leads to true conclusions, even if it's not a perfect process? And how can you be confident that the processes you're utilizing right now are properly functioning? They can even grant the primacy of existence claim to their challengers for the sake of argument, because they can say, yeah, sure, if you assume that reasoning is a reliable belief-forming process and you trust your cognitive faculties are properly functioning, then you can trust in that conclusion that existence is a given and can't be doubted. But you're assuming the very thing I've challenged you to defend, they can say. What the presuppositionalist is doing there is the very same sort of rational objection raised by the atheist Thomas Hobbes in his correspondence with René Descartes, when Descartes put forward his cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, argument. Such a conclusion, I am, from, I think, Hobbes rightly observed, warrants our trust only on the assumption that reason leads to true conclusions, and that the very act of reasoning which engendered it was not somehow compromised or malfunctioning. What the presuppositionalist is asking you to do is provide some sort of account, which he boasts he has, for how anyone can trust deduction, induction, memory, the senses, etc. So saying existence exists, or I think therefore I am, is a complete waste of time. If you reason your way to the so-called primacy of existence conclusion, then you've utilized your reasoning, the very thing you've been challenged to defend, and hence you are begging the question against them. You are literally smuggling your conclusion in as a hidden premise in your argument. Now, it needs to be said that the thorny epistemological problem of how and if one can legitimately use reason to defend the use of reason is age-old. This isn't some brilliant contribution of presuppositionalists to the history of ideas. That question was posed and understood going as far back as the ancient Greeks by ancient skeptics and Pyrrhonian skeptics. It's been addressed in many different ways ever since. And one may not like the question. One might even feel one needn't take the question seriously, and I'll leave it to each to decide whether to take the question seriously or not. But if so, if you do take it seriously, how you want to wrestle with it is up to you. But what one must not do, except on pain of utterly circular reasoning and failing to appreciate the question, is to respond with some proposition such as existence exists, or I think therefore I am, which one has arrived at by reasoning. All such answers miss the point of the challenge. If you think the challenge is pointless or confused, then argue that. But don't delude yourself into thinking that you've responded to the challenge when you present an argument, no matter how self-evident the conclusion seems to you, for why you can trust in the use of argumentation itself. Rejoinders, such as the primacy of existence argument, Descartes' cogito ergo sum argument, that's the I think therefore I am argument, and statements such as I know I'm not your God, or I know I'm not omniscient, are nothing to the point. Such propositions may stump the confused cyclones who've been led down the garden path into thinking it's important to demonstrate that you can't name something you're certain of. And while it may be emotionally satisfying to stump them right back, it doesn't address the real challenge they're trying to present, even if it is ill-posed by them. And they know you're not really answering the deeper question they're putting forth. It smells like an evasive maneuver to them. This is why they're untroubled by such counter-apologetics and walk away feeling even more confident that their view is unassailable. We shouldn't rebut bad apologetics with our own bad counter-apologetics. Let's leave the any old argument will do approach to them. So in conclusion, there is no legitimate use of the primacy of existence argument when arguing with a presuppositionalist, not even with the most confused cyclone version of it. The hard question, which you may feel is absurd or not worth taking seriously, is left unaddressed. One can choose to address the question or not, but let's not kid ourselves into thinking that the primacy of existence addresses the question they're really asking, which is about how you can trust any sort of reasoning or argumentation to reliably lead to true conclusions. A better approach is to challenge them on what their account of deduction is and see if they can do it without arguing in a circle. I think you'll find they can't answer their own challenge, no matter how often they invoke their God and prattle on about him having a rational nature. And when push comes to shove, they will invariably resort to the hilariously fatuous, unprincipled, and self-congratulatory declaration that their circular reasoning is a good thing, a virtuous circle. Please. So I hope this helps, and thanks for watching.